Amalek is presented in our tradition as a nihilistic, destructive force that attacks without mercy and without reason. And we, in turn, project onto Amalek the images of all of our greatest enemies. Saul had an opportunity to destroy Amalek entirely, but whether because of compassion or because of greed, he stayed his hand, and he was punished for his hesitancy. This Shabbat, the Shabbat before Purim, we reread Saul's story together with the Torah's paradoxical injunction to remember what Amalek did, but also to erase its memory. So, what really did Amalek do? And is he really our enemy? The traces are on the record in Tanakh. Amalek attacks the people of Israel when they're leaving Egypt. But he doesn't attack the warriors at the front. He attacks the stragglers at the back. Much later, Amalek attacks the town of Ziklag, where David is on the run from Saul. Again, Amalek attacks at a time when the warriors are not there. There are no defenders in Ziklag. David gives chase, and he eventually locates the raiders after finding a slave that they had abandoned in the desert, a slave who got sick and was too slow to keep up with the group, whom the Amalekites then left to die of thirst in the desert because they didn't want the trouble of bringing him along with them. By juxtaposition, the Torah connects this picture of Amalek as a force which attacks the weak and the defenseless. The Torah connects this picture with its commands about unjust weights and measures. The command to remember Amalek is taught in Devarim at the end of Ki-Teitzei, next to the injunction not to use unjust weights in the marketplace, as if to remind us that a market trader who miscalibrates his scales and takes advantage of the unwary might also be compared with Amalek in some way, and perhaps to remind us that Amalek can be closer to home than we first think. I'd like to bring you a remark in the Sifrei, the halachic midrash on Devarim, which makes this point, and which tells us, quite shockingly, if we are only accustomed to thinking about Amalek as the other one, the dark side, it tells us quite shockingly that we too can be like Amalek. The Sifrei is enigmatically brief. Bamidah shemadadata ba madadu lecha. You were measured with the measure that you used. Bamidah shemadadata ba madadu lecha. It's a reference to the laws on unjust weights, but it's also a reference to the expression midah keneged midah. You got what you deserved. And then the Sifrei explains. Ma'ata ayef ve'agea ve'lo yireh Elohim afhu ayef ve'agea ve'lo yireh Elohim. Just as you were tired and weary and didn't fear God, so he too was tired and weary and didn't fear God. What is the Sifrei telling us? That we're like Amalek in some way. Amalek is not something outside us onto which we can project our enemies. Amalek is close to us. We can do what he does. Actually, thinking behind the Sifrei, we might realize that Amalek is part of our family. He's our cousin. He's a close relative. Let's go back to the Sifrei. Ma'ata ayef ve'agea ve'lo yireh Elohim. You were tired and weary and didn't fear God. This is the history of the encounter as it's told in the Parsha of Bashalach in Shemot. The people are leaving Egypt. They're tired. They cross the Red Sea. There's no food or water. And they call out, is God really among us or not? They don't know. And it's at that point, at that moment of loss of faith, that they were attacked by Amalek. So we can understand the first part of the Sifrei. Israel was tired and weary and did not fear God. We may not agree with it, but we can understand it. What about the second part? Afhu ayef ve'agea ve'lo yireh Elohim. He too was tired and weary and didn't fear God. Again, I think we can understand Lo Yireh Elohim. That's a description of Amalek as he attacks. He has no empathy and no fear of God. But what about being tired and weary? Is this Amalek? What's the Sifrei talking about? Where is Amalek tired and weary? To understand better, we need the genealogy. Amalek's father is Eliphaz. His mother is Timnah. Timnah, by the way, was a princess who, according to tradition, wanted to convert to Judaism, but was rejected by the rabbis. So she married Eliphaz, the son of Esav, and their son was Amalek, who attacked Israel in the desert. It's in connection with Esav that we can find the words, the reference to tired and weary. Vayavo Esav min hasadeh vehu ayef. Esav comes in from a field and he is tired. That's the reference which the Sifrei is making, and the connection to weights and measures. It's as if the Sifrei is hinting, if only, when Esav came in tired from his hunt, if only Yaakov hadn't overcharged him for a bowl of soup, hadn't cheated him on weights and measures, leading eventually to his loss of the birthright and the blessing, the great cry of Esav, which was echoed by the cry of Mordechai in Shushan, and the two tears that Esav shed, which apparently led to the destruction of two temples. If only Yaakov hadn't overcharged Esav for his soup, then perhaps Esav's descendants might not have attacked Yaakov's in the desert when they left Egypt and again in the land of Israel. This is not to say that Esav's children were right to attack Yaakov's. This is not to say that revenge is just. But the Sifrei seems to be pointing out that actions have consequences, that hatred can breed hatred, and contempt can breed contempt. That the smallest action we may take today might have enormous ramifications for our children and our children's children. So, as we think this Shabbat about how we can erase the memory of Amalek, perhaps we can think again about what Amalek really means and how we, in our own lives, can really erase, through our own actions, its memory.